I paid Alex Hormozi 225 grand to learn how to grow my personal brand. And in 90 days since then, I've grown my views by over 12 times. And so in this video, I'm gonna explain exactly how I did it, the struggles I personally had to overcome, and the limiting beliefs I had to break for myself, as well as, if you stay to the end, what my plan is to 10x my views again over the next year, as well as my overall plan to hit 10 million a month in my current company. So before we start, I don't claim to be an expert or content and social media or any of this stuff. And in fact, just 90 days ago, what I will tell you is I was an expert in absolutely sucking at making content. I mean, I was terrible. And so I was able to go from absolutely horrible at this stuff to the point to where, I'm not even kidding, I've had over 100 plus, 7, 8, multiple 8, even 9-figure business owners personally hitting me up saying that they love my content. And so the real reason I'm making this video is if you're a business owner who was busy running their business just like I was and struggling to grow your personal brand, or maybe even if you're not sure you should start a personal brand in the first place, then not only are you gonna learn a ton from my journey, but I think the deeper you get into this video and learn about the breakthroughs that I've personally had, the more you're just gonna be relieved about how easy making content can actually be if you just get out of your own way. And I think you'll leave this video being crystal clear on what your next step should be for your brand after you hear what I have to say. So with that said, let's dive in. So to give you some background, in Q4 2025, I finally decided for 2026, I'm actually going to try with content. And so I'm not gonna go into all the struggles I used to have in the past and why I wasn't taking it seriously, but what you need to know is, just as somebody who's running a big company, I mean, at one point I had 3 companies doing 7 million a month. And so I was really busy. It just never got prioritized. And I was kind of putting out content to show I was alive, but long story short, I was just half-assing it for 5 years. And so going into 2026, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take 12 months and just freaking commit to this for once. And if at the end of 12 months I don't wanna do it, I can let myself out the hook and not do it. So part of kicking off that commitment was paying Alex Hormozi 225 grand. And I learned a ton of stuff, but one of the real value I got from it is, specifically, I publicly declared that I was paying him. And not only did I pay him for that reason, I made videos about it multiple times and publicly declared on several different channels that I was doing it because I was going all in on content. And so that made me really feel like, okay, if I would have backed out of this, I'm just gonna look like such a freaking idiot. If 12 months from now, they're like, dude, the guy paid 225 grand, he didn't even post, he didn't even do anything. So a lot of people know, like, obviously you invest to learn information and get transformation and all that stuff, but a big part of how you can make investments is just structuring it in a way to put massive leverage on yourself. Because there were so many times just in the come up of this where I was frustrated, I was like, this isn't worth my time, this is freaking stupid, I don't like this, I have better stuff to do. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, man, like if I quit, I mean, it's like, I'm gonna look like such a freaking dumbass. So that was a real value out of that. Now, that being said, I got a ton of other great information. So I went to their office and was able to talk to Alex, Layla, and Sharon about how to actually build kind of like a media company and what their media company was actually set up like. So this was their old structure. They have a new structure now that is like so incredibly advanced that it's not even worth showing you. But this is the structure that I think most people can learn a lot from. So for them, they have a director of media, and then under the director of media is 3 talents. So like Alex, Layla, Sharon. Now, for most of us that are probably watching this, we are the talent, right? We don't have like multiple talents, but just so you know, this is what they do. Then under each talent is actually this team structure under every single one of these, under each of the 3. And then so each talent has a content director, and then the content director oversees all the strategists. So a long form strategist essentially does YouTube, is like 90% of their job. But since podcasts are also long form, and a lot of times that gets repurposed, that falls under the long form strategist. And then they have editors under them. We'll talk about long form strategist responsibilities in just a second, but that's basically that. Then the short form strategist is TikTok, Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. And then they, I think, have an editor per platform on each one of those, or maybe the Instagram one does both, but you get the point. That's what short form strategist does. The LinkedIn strategist, kind of same thing, one editor for LinkedIn. Then they have, depending on the talent, I remember it was 1 or 2 videographers per talent. Then there's the YouTube mids channel, the clips channel. And if you've heard Alex talk about that, he posts a ton of like 2 to 10 minute videos on his mids channel. It's not his main YouTube channel, but that channel, despite doing way less views, does twice the amount of revenue as his main channel. So that's a huge thing that I think is very, very valuable for a lot of us. And then the X posting is done, in their case, by the talent. They don't have like a ghostwriter or anything. Like you probably follow Alex on X and you see that he does all of his own content. So a few notes about this structure, a little bit more about the long form strategist. This is really a YouTube strategist. They're in charge of packaging, which is really just ideation to title to thumbnail. Now, for different media companies, what I've learned is this can take different forms. So some YouTube strategists, they come up with all the ideas themselves and like in an ideation meeting, pitch the talent and the entire team all the ideas. Maybe it's 50 ideas and they pick one or two, okay? And sometimes they also even script out the entire video for the talent. Now, I don't think Alex, Layla, and Sharon, I don't think theirs works like this, but I know for other brands that are really, really big out there, they have somebody else scripting all their videos. And so a lot of times the way that'll work is they figure out the idea and then the talent will send like a 10-minute lube or a voice message or whatever about like their thoughts on the topic or the idea or whatever. And then the strategist, turns that into a script with all the hooks and the open loops and all the, bells and whistles. Now, other times, and I think this is more of how ACQs works, is the ideation is actually done by Alex, Layla, or Sharon. Like they kind of figure out, hey, like this is what's going on in my life and this is what I want to talk about. But then the strategist will take like, let's say the 3 or 4 things that happened to Alex last week. They'll say, I think this is the most interesting one. And they'll take that original idea and kind of reverse engineer the packaging. So as you'll see, there's kind of 2 ways that you can do this. You can either essentially start with the idea, which is done from kind of looking at what's going on in YouTube and what's gone viral and the outliers and what's going to perform. And then you start with the idea and then go to the content. Or the other way is you start with the content and reverse engineer it. So depending on the talent and what their preferences are, the strategist is going to do one or the other. And I'm going to talk about, this is a big point that I really struggle with. If you stay a little bit longer, I'll talk about which one I like to do. And there's one of these versions that I absolutely freaking hate with a passion. Okay. Or the strategist could do a combination of these things. So what they also do is they oversee pre-production, which is like they oversee the videographer doing shoot, make sure everything looks how it should look for YouTube. They oversee post-production, which is basically the pipeline between the videographer, the editor, and being finished and also being packaged. And so that's YouTube short or long form strategist in a nutshell. Then the short form strategist is pretty similar, right? So again, TikTok, Facebook Reels, IG Reels, Shorts. I think the Hormozis even have a TikTok strategist versus the others, but I could be wrong on that. I mean, obviously, the more you specialize, the better it's going to get, but it just depends how big you are and if it's worth it. And the responsibilities overall of the short form strategist are similar to the long form strategist. It's just for short form. So they still might do ideation. They still might do the scripting, yada, yada. Okay. It's pretty much the same. It's just specialized into a different platform because what works on short form and the formats and the ideas and so on and so forth can be very, very different than long form, okay? But one key difference of the short form strategist is they also have to manage a position called minors, right? Because if you're not doing direct to camera or direct purposed for short form, and you're just actually clipping, then you have to have people who are a little bit more higher level than your editors actually going through and identifying what is a good clip and what the structure of the clip could be. Because what a lot of people don't realize is with clipping, somebody will have to go through the video, and a lot of times the hook is not in the beginning. Like if you watch, let's say, a podcast that's one of my podcasts or anybody's, it usually doesn't work out to where like the hook happened right at the beginning. A lot of times the hook is somewhere in the middle of the conversation. It gets pulled out to the front and then they almost restructure kind of the entire thing. So it has the format of like hook content, or like hook story lesson or whatever, but it doesn't always happen linearly in the content that they're clipping. The minor kind of has to identify and like sort of put the puzzle pieces together. So we'll talk more about that later too. And then obviously like the LinkedIn strategist, the mid stuff, the X stuff, that's all common sense. So I left and I'm like, okay, that's great. This is super badass. You guys have a huge freaking team. It probably costs several $100,000 a month to run that. That's a little bit over my level. Like I'm starting from basically zero. So I started with a lean team and kind of grew into this. So I'll show you my structure. I'm at the top. And so I'm basically the director of media, the talent, and the content director. And so then I have a long form strategist, Nolan. He also doubles up as my videographer because he's local. And then there's an editor under him. Then basically all the other platforms, which I'm not necessarily focused on going all in on those, because for me, YouTube is like my core main platform I'm trying to win at and trying to perfect, and then everything else is repurposed. And so all the other distribution channels are done through Aaron, and then there's editors one or two, and a minor under him. Okay. So a few notes on this. We're not nearly as big, obviously. Like I'm starting, they're like going from 10 to 100. I was going from 0 to 1, essentially. So we're kind of growing in to that structure over time. It's also, I just wanted to let you know, I've had a lot of people ask me this. It's rare to find a long form strategist who can also be your videographer. Mine just happens to be really good at both and be local, right? So it just worked out perfectly. And so mids for us, if you see up here, mids is actually YouTube and X. So we have a separate mids YouTube channel, but then we also do the same strategy we do with YouTube mids on X. And so that's something that's a little bit different, but you'll see how that all kind of comes together as you see my whole strategy. LinkedIn right now, we're really, really bad at this. It's just kind of a pulse play. So we're kind of still trying to figure out what to do with LinkedIn. It's not going to be a huge focus, but I mean, we couldn't be any more worse at it right now. So we're trying to like figure out, okay, like what's going to do a little bit better on LinkedIn. If you have any ideas, you can hit me up. Now I'm doing this again. I'm going to keep it lean into our monetization is better. I'll talk about monetization later. And the other thing is too, is the org chart that you have should really reflect your strategy. So ours, again, like I mentioned, is very long form focused with massive clipping and redistribution on the other platforms. And as I get into kind of my strategy and where I landed with how I'm doing content, this will all make a lot more sense. If you're enjoying this conversation and you want to be in a room of people who are just like the people I have on this podcast, so you can ultimately network with the highest level people in the industry and up level your business, you should fly out to meet us in Scotland at the end of July. So this is a one-time opportunity where you can get a ticket to actually be able to come if you qualify to network and get content and ultimately work with me and my team and so many other high-level speakers in the industry in Scotland at the end of July. So you have to be doing at least $100,000 a month in your business to qualify. If not, don't bother with it. But if that's you and you're trying to scale to 10 million or even 20 million or 100 million a year, there's other people in the room who have done that, and the speakers I'm going to have in Scotland have done that too. So check out the link in the description and see if you qualify. And if you do, book a call with my team. We'll talk about the ticket price to be able to come. This is the only time you're going to be able to do this, so take advantage of it. Now, back to the podcast. So I want to tell you my initial strategy because you see a lot of the misconceptions I had, the limiting beliefs I had to go through, the struggles, and kind of how I iterated and then landed on where I am now. And I think this is going to have a lot of lessons kind of imbued into all of this. So very, very different than what I'm doing now. My initial strategy was to go broad and monetize with B2C. When I say broad, like broad appeal content to like young guys in their 20s. That was going to be my market. And so this ended up being a huge mistake. But the thought process was that, all these bigger brands are making the most money on this broad content. Like if you look at Cody Sanchez, Dan Martell, Alex Hormozi, even Sharon now, like all of this stuff is like, everything is very broad appeal. And so the reason the reason that appealed to me, so to speak, is that content for me was kind of in the chicken and the egg dilemma, right? And so because I was in a place where I was already running, a multiple 8-figure company, and we're pacing like 35, 36 million this year, and we'll do way, way more than that next year. Because I was operating as the CEO, a very, very profitable and successful company, I'm kind of in this place where it's like the short-term ROI of content is terrible versus anything else I could be doing. And in the back of my mind, it's like, okay, I know that's true. But at the same time, I know the long-term ROI of content, like if I scaled a huge brand like Alex or something, I mean, obviously that would be 100% worth it, but it's sort of only worth it if the views are big enough. And so what I'll say is like, for me, if I get YouTube, let's say to 10,000 views a video, which we're pretty much at there right now, it literally doesn't affect my business. Like, I mean, it can't, and when I say it doesn't affect it, it doesn't even put a dent in my revenue or my profit. It does not even it's almost not even worth it. Okay. So for me, I'm like, okay, for this to be worth it, like I have to get to hundreds of thousands of views of video. And so that's why I went broad and I targeted young guys in their 20s, like with personal development. And because I was so broad, we were going to monetize through RCA, which was like our sales training program for people who aren't in sales and they want to get into sales. Now, this maybe sounds smart. No. It was very, 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 very stupid. And so really what I was trying to do in hindsight is like, I was trying to go from zero, jumping all the way to a big brand. And you'll see how that just didn't work out and also maybe want to kill myself. So number two, in terms of our initial strategy is, like any good student, like I like to do a lot of research and understand a lot of things, and I like to pay people for coaching. So like, I paid Alex, but then I went to all sorts of YouTube gurus and people on YouTube and people who are really successful or, big personal brands out there. You would know I would go to their strategists and pay them money. So like I paid everybody money. And I wanted to know what's working for everybody. What was their advice? What should we do? And I really, kind of like understood what I call like the YouTube guru meta. All right. Which is basically like, what are the best practices of YouTube right now? Most effective tactics, something. I think that's what meta stands for. But anyways, so here's how people basically tell you to grow on YouTube. You pick a niche, you find the outlier performing videos in that niche. Okay. Probably sounds familiar if you know anything about this. Then you make packaging and titling based on like, you kind of go off of the idea and the outlier, but then you make packaging and titling that's similar to that, but you kind of make it to your own, right? And then you put your own unique spin on the content. But the key here is you're not starting with what you want to talk about or what you think is valuable or what content you want to make. You're starting out there with what's validated in the marketplace, and then you're sort of making content about that. So you're backing out the content. It's not content first, it's ideation and packaging and outlier first. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, there's some value to this. Okay, I'm not going to totally discredit it, but I think especially for people like me and especially for business owners, I think this is really misguided and very, very stupid. I think it's probably the worst advice for most people. And I think it really keeps a lot of people who know a lot of great information just not getting a lot of views, not getting any results. And I'll explain why in a little bit more. I think the more B2C you are and the more broad you are naturally, the more value this can have. But the more B2B you are and the more specific you are, the more you're doing this for business, the worse it gets. But we're going to talk about that a lot in detail later. So the other thing in terms of the initial strategy is we were going to do highly produced talking head videos. So my videos, even the ones that didn't get a lot of views and that were kind of like, in 2025, 2024, 2023, my structure and strategy. I mean, I'm doing this on a Google Doc right now. I tend to be very informationally dense. And because of this, like I like to accompany Google Docs or slides or visuals because like if you're going to be very informationally dense, you have to have props to help people understand what you're talking about. And I had everybody tell me, oh my gosh, if you do Google Doc videos where it's half screen Google Doc, half screen you're never going to get a lot of views. Like you might get a little bit of views, but nobody's going to watch it, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And so everybody was like, no, what you really need to do, what really works is you need to make traditional, highly produced talking head videos and then animate the visuals as you need it with your editors. And so I'm like, okay, that sounds good. I'll do that. In the back of my head, I was like, I don't watch any videos that are like that. So, and my audience is kind of like me. So I'm like, it felt wrong. And it was wrong. It ended up being super freaking stupid. I'll tell you why in a little bit. Okay. So what were the initial results? Well, I'll tell you. Number one, terrible views. And so they were so bad that I deleted with our first 4 videos. I just deleted them all. I went back, just deleted them. I was like, this is embarrassing. Okay. So we were bad before. We were really bad before. I mean, I would maybe get 2,000 to 5,000 views a video, but I mean, they weren't good. Like the only thing that really carried me is that kind of people know who I am a little bit. And I do think the information was good, but the titling, packaging, everything, it was just bad. So we went from bad to 20 to 30, not necessarily 20 to 30% worse. It would have been 70 to 80% worse. Like we were getting 20 to 30% of what we usually get. Like I wasn't even breaking 1,000 views and I'm trying to go broad, by the way. Okay. So I went from bad to horrible. All right. And part of this, I'm just going to be honest, I think was because of my sub base is like used to hardcore sales information. They're used to hardcore business information. So like seeing the pivot of, I literally made a video called How to Get Rich in Your 20s. It just bombed. Okay. And so I also think though, part of it was the sub base and like my current audience wasn't used to that. I also think part of it is like the content just fucking sucked. And this was a huge, huge lesson. And so I'll kind of break this down in a little bit more detail, but the issue with the outlier to packaging to scripting sequence that we already talked about that's like YouTube meta is that number one, it forces unoriginality because literally like your ideation is starting from somebody else's content and ideas. And so what's interesting is, that's what everybody does. But if you look at the people who are the best in the game, I mean, Mr. Beast, he doesn't do that. Okay. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a swipe file of like videos he thought were really good ideas, but he doesn't do that. I know for a fact that Hormozi doesn't do that, which I didn't realize until later after I left his office, but they don't do that. Like he starts with what he does want to talk about. Okay. And then also if you look at the top earning podcasts from a CPM and advertising revenue perspective in the business space, which is Acquired, David Senra /Founders, Invest Like the Best, TPBN, which by the way, sold for over $100 million, somewhere between $100 and $3 million to OpenAI with very little views. Okay. But they're the highest CPMs, like they have the highest value viewers. None of them do that. right? Like, I mean, it's literally content first. And so it all just forces on originality. And then the other thing is too, and this is what killed me, is this is not fun or exciting. And so part of making content is talking about stuff that you're passionate or excited about. So for instance, I'm making this video, and did it come from me seeing an outlier? F no, okay? The reason I'm making this video is because I fell for all of this bullshit, and I wasted like longer than 2 months really if you go back into kind of trying this stuff a little bit in 2025. But I mean, I put myself through like so much pain making these videos I didn't want to make, that weren't valuable, that diminished my brand just by trying to follow the YouTube meta advice. And so like, I'm passionate about this, therefore I'm making this content, which makes it way more enjoyable and way more doable long term. But if you do this kind of traditional method, it's not fun or exciting, you know? And a great example is like Hormozi. You can tell he used to do this thing, and now he just switched it to where, again, he looks at what come up recently in his business and life, what he's excited or passionate about, then he makes content about that. And then you make the content, and you might coordinate with like your strategist and say, hey, I'm thinking about either making content about this, that, or the other. Out of these three, which do you think is going to do best on YouTube? Okay, great. I'm not saying like you throw the strategist out the window, but you make the content and then they package it after the fact. That's their job. Okay. And in my experience, and I'll show you examples later, this has just worked way better. Okay. But when I start with somebody else's idea, I shouldn't even say 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, I didn't give a fuck about the idea. Okay. It wasn't something I was interested in. I hated making the content, and all of that showed. Like, I felt like I was in physical pain making content about how to get rich in your 20s and to not be on your phone, to not scroll on social media. Like, I'm glad people make content about that, and that, you know, that's needed out there. I'm not saying it's bad. I just don't have fun talking to that audience. I want to talk about high level business, high level sales team stuff. I want to talk to people who are doing 8 and 9 figures in their companies, figure out what's working for them. That's what I like. And so, but, you know, trying to follow the YouTube meta strategies, it's not what I was doing. All right. So the third reason is the other thing about this type of content is you can't properly express your expertise. And so when you pick an outlier or topic and you're like, I'm going to try to go viral, oftentimes it doesn't necessarily line up with what you're good at. Okay. And so let alone what you want to talk about. And so like, I often found myself writing scripts about stuff like I wasn't even really necessarily an expert in, but I have to fit somehow my life experience and my knowledge into this viral concept. And so it just didn't work for me. Okay. So the number 2 thing, again, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to blow my brains out. Like I felt like as I was making it, I was making slop, and I hated it. All right. And so, you know, I was kind of thinking to myself, I was making these videos, like, I guess this is what YouTube wants, but like, man, like these videos that I'm making, I would never watch myself, opposed to kind of what I'm doing now. I'm making the content that I would want to see. And then on top of that, this type of stuff took a ton of time. And because these weren't necessarily my original ideas and my expertise, like I had to research what I was going to talk about. I had to come up with the new ideas and frameworks, opposed to just using the ideas and frameworks that I use with clients. And then I had to script out everything word for word, because I can't just like rip a video off the cuff about something I'm not an expert in. And so I've learned since that as a business owner, you have to find a format that you enjoy and still allows you to focus on your business. So like, again, this video, it was so much easier to make because I just like brain dumped everything I've learned about kind of going through my journey that's totally relevant to me. So by the way, just to take a pause, I know some of this stuff might sound super fucking obvious. All right. But I'm telling you, like, I see out there so many 8 and 9 figure people who are really, really smart at what they do. And they're just so focused on trying to be a YouTuber and making these like highly produced talking head videos and trying to do the packaging. And they're making a video called How to Get Customers So Fast It Feels Illegal. And so many people fall for this, even though like what I'm saying here is, you know, make content that you're an expert in. Don't make content about stuff you don't like. I mean, make content about what you're passionate about. I mean, I know some of this is like the most basic advice ever, but I think when you're like intelligent and you want to do things the right way and you want to do all the best practices and you want to learn from the best, you just get in your own way. And I just like really wasted a lot of time and money, and also just went through pain falling through this stuff. And I see so many other people doing it too. Hey, if the way you sell your product or service is through phone sales, you need to stop using booking systems like OneSub, Calendly, iClose, and other booking systems that aren't designed specifically for a phone sales approach or a phone sales team. So we at Saleskick just launched a new calendar and booking system that'll decrease your cost per book call because it's conversion rate optimized specifically for call funnels, whereas most other calendar systems are meant for corporate all-purpose booking, and it'll increase your show rates. So we've had clients see 30 to 100% increases in their show rate because our calendar system is specifically designed for call funnels and other funnels that are high volume sales call booking funnels. And the software does so much more. It's really the only product designed specifically for sales teams with inbound booking systems. So if you're interested, go to saleskick.com, check it out. Now back to the video. Now to some exciting stuff. So finally I had a breakthrough. And so after I was making these videos that I fucking hated, made me want to off myself, I finally kind of like, I was in a content crisis, and then just by sheer luck, I kind of had a breakthrough. And so what happened is this video came out. It was a podcast I did with one of my good friends. I mean, he's one of my best friends, Robbie. And, he also has a multiple eight-figure business in the same space. And so the backstory around this is actually he and his fiance were just staying at our house for the weekend. Like they came over and stayed for like 4 nights in our casita. And, me and him, we always have great business conversations. And like, they're just like effortless. Like we can go for like 3 hours. We just talk about all sorts of stuff. And it's just, our chemistry is really, really good. And so I figured like, for the first time ever, like, why don't we just film this? Because I have, Nolan, my strategist, he's local. I'm going to have him come over. We're just going to film what we talk about anyways. And so then the video launched, and I know it only says 4X right here, but compared to what I was doing before, it was about like a 10X plus. And that kind of blew my mind because this took 10, instead of me taking all week writing stuff about shit I didn't even want to talk about, this took literally 10 minutes of prep. It was fun. And then the other thing that was crazy about it is not only did it do a lot of views, but then all these people doing like 8 figures, multiple 8 figures, mid 7 figures, who never text me about my content ever, were texting me and they were like, yo, this video is sick. This video is awesome. And it generated more B2B leads than any video I've ever done. And it was like a podcast. Okay. Not only that, and we'll talk about this more later, it produced all sorts of other short form content and content for other platforms that did hundreds of thousands of views if you combine all of that all together. So moving forward, I kind of like noted that in my brain and I was like, that was interesting. And I didn't know if it would be necessarily a sustainable strategy. And so I didn't stop doing, if you look at the channel, there's 2 more like kind of broader videos that came out after that. But then I figured like, let me test it again. And who's somebody else that's kind of like Robbie, that we have the same chemistry? And like my buddy Ryan's like a great example of this. Like me and Ryan just go super, super tactical and can talk again for like multiple hours. So then I did one with Ryan and basically the same exact result. And this one was even more tactical. Like I was worried during the conversation. I'm like, man, we're talking about like high level sales ops stuff and stuff that's like really specific, that a lot of strategists would tell you, oh, it's like too specific. Well, it got way more views than my regular stuff, and it generated even more leads. Okay. And so what's crazy is not only did we go more tactical and more specific and add more, like basically we had more value in the video. And you would think, okay, well, yeah, sure, you got more leads, but yeah, you're not going to get as many views. No, we got more views and more leads, which goes to show you that like the value of the content is just, it's king. Okay. So after this video, I decided 2 things. Number one, I was like, I'm going all in on this podcast style format video. Okay. And then my strategy of this podcast is interestingly evolved over time, which you're going to see in a moment. Number 2 is I was like, I'm done with the broad stuff. Like as soon as I got a lifeline out of making how to get rich in your 20s, I grabbed that lifeline. I was like, I'm done with this shit. And so I specifically after that was like, you know what? I'm going to target people who are basically my mastermind clients, which if you don't know, we have a mastermind. It's, about 200 people, 3 events a year. It's very, very expensive. You have to be doing $1 million a year to even qualify. We have people in there doing 50 to even 100 million a year, several people doing multiple 8 figures. And it's really a mastermind of how to go to 100K a month to $1 million a month. I've been doing it since 2021, but it's not something we advertise publicly because a lot of people work with us on the sales team side. And then they find out about that and we kind of grow them into it or have them join. And so again, that market's kind of online service-based business owners, coaches, agencies, consultants, some people in the medical space since I have a background there and so on and so forth. And they're all trying to go from usually around 200 to 300 grand a month to $1 million a month plus, or the $1 million a month guys are obviously trying to stack more millions a month. And so I love that mastermind, and it's a mastermind that even I go to as a multiple 8-figure business owner, and I run it, and I learn a lot of stuff at my own mastermind. And so I like talking to those people. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make content for those people. There's not a lot of them, but I'm going to make content for those people. That's my market. So I basically decided, okay, I'm going to have a target market. I'm going to focus on content that solves problem for that market. I know, revolutionary idea. And then I'm also going to do this podcast style format because it takes me very little time and it's doing way more views. Okay. And also, by the way, like the YouTube collab feature, I think really kind of helped this as well, because a lot of these guys like Ryan and Revy I collab with too. So in a perfect world moving forward, the new strategy, and this is still kind of what my strategy is now, just with some changes, as you'll see, is one podcast a week and then one solo podcast video, whatever you want to call it, like this per week. Okay. But specifically targeting this new market, solving problems for them, and then all that stuff, right? And the solo videos, instead of, again, being like the talking head, whatever type of videos, are more videos like this that are more tactical, they're more specific, they're more stuff that's really targeted to somebody solving a problem, which the only struggle I have, and we'll talk about why I'm having a struggle with this, as you'll see kind of with my business plan later, is like, it's just tough for me to find the time to make the solo videos. But I will say, like, I do enjoy making them when I make them because they're about stuff I actually want to talk about. So, and then beyond that, the strategy is to repost the pod on all platforms, which brings me to the next point, which is multi-platform. And so the big issue with the solo videos is, you know, if you make, let's say, talking head videos just for YouTube, even if you do well, they do not splice well into all the other platforms. And so essentially they don't clip well. Like if like a video like this, it's not going to do well on X. It's not going to do well on Instagram, Facebook Reels, any of that stuff. But the beauty of podcasts, for whatever reason, I think it's just the back and forth nature to it, and kind of like, yeah, I guess it's the back and forth nature and the clippability of it, and especially to also how long it is and how many topics get covered. It clips so phenomenally well, and podcast clipping will do better a lot of times than even if I make content specifically for Instagram. Okay. So here's kind of the thing, is I realized this one piece of content per week that I'm making that also takes minimal prep, way less than a video like this one, allows me to get tons of views on literally every platform. So I'll show you this. This has been my views increase. If you compare, I believe basically the last 30 days to the same 30-day chunk in 2025. Okay. So Instagram, we're doing 2 million a month views. This doesn't count ads. So like we're actually doing 11 million a month, but I guess some of that is ads. And I can't tell if that's people who see the ad, then go watch a video on my page, or if it's like counting the ads views. So I just did 2 million a month. I know for sure that's organic. That's a 12x increase year over year. YouTube longs is a 5.4x increase year over year, right? So we're doing 60K a month there. YouTube shorts, 103K a month, right? So that's a 20x increase year over year. The mids is brand new. We're doing about 3K a month. That'll do probably way, way more than that. We just got to dial in that strategy. And part of that is not packaging and titling in the content. It's just operationally, we're kind of lacking there, but that should be fixed within 30 days. Then TikTok is basically brand new for the most part, but 223K a month, which is 26 year over year X increase. Facebook Reels is 1.2 million a month, purely organic, which is a 12X increase year over year. Again, doesn't count ads. LinkedIn doesn't get views, but we're getting 47K a month impressions, which is pretty shitty, whatever. And then X, we actually get 30K views a month. It's been as high as 60K views a month. So if you add that all together, it's 3.6 million views a month. And so I'm not saying that's like really good or anything, but it's way fucking better than what I used to be. I mean, I was literally not even less than 10% of that last year. Okay. And we're not even that good at distribution yet. We'll get a lot better. And here's what's interesting about this multi-platform thing is, so again, not only can I take something that has very little prep, is super fun to do, and it goes into every single platform really well, but at the same time, you know, this is an interesting story. Iman Ghazi's old number 2 guy told me that he noticed that when they were on every single platform, like YouTube was their main thing, their main money maker, etc. But if they only did YouTube longs, then their views went down. Whereas if they did the same quality of content on YouTube, but they were on every single other platform, their YouTube views went way up. And so there is some sort of synergistic effect. And the way I kind of think about it is that all of these other channels, in a way, they're also like, Instagram's really good for conversion content. If you have a big enough LinkedIn, I know you can actually make a lot of money from LinkedIn. YouTube is obviously a big money maker, but if you think about like X, like I'm not going to make any money on X, but if you see my stuff on X and I'm clipping the podcast and putting it out there, you're probably not going to like sit on your phone and watch a whole podcast on X. But what you might do is it just constantly reminds you that like, oh yeah, like I got to go back and like save that video on Cole's YouTube channel. Oh yeah, I got to go watch that on Saturday. Right. And so it's almost like advertising for your main core piece of conversion content, which is like your YouTube longs. And I noticed specifically for us that the more as soon as we started really getting the distribution on all the short form platforms down, is when our YouTube started to get a lot more momentum, which is pretty cool. So breakthroughs from here. So then, I took a break from the solo videos. I'm kind of just getting back into it. I was a little bit burned out after doing the broad stuff and wanted to off myself. But I continued with the pods, and then this video came out. And this only says a 2.2. Again, it was a lot more than, relatively, it was actually more than that at the time if you compared it to the other videos. But this video was a 1 out of 10. And it's going to end up pacing like probably 15, 20K because it's still relatively new. And what's unique about this video is that it was with my CMO, who obviously I can't collab with. He doesn't have a YouTube, and nobody really knows who my CMO is. Okay. But despite nobody knowing who the guest was, this outperformed all previous podcasts in terms of trending. Like, obviously, Rubbies is doing more than it now, but over time, this should do more than Rubbies based on the trend line. It outperformed every single previous pod, including Dean Graziosi, who's like a pretty big brand. So this was a huge breakthrough because it showed me that, and I'm kind of like going to go horseshoe back to some of the stuff I was sort of denouncing, but you'll see how I'm kind of like, how I'm going to kind of like split the line here, is it showed me that the topic and the packaging is just as, if not more important than the guest, which is really huge because as soon as you start a podcast, like I have a really great network, which is why podcast made sense for me. But I was thinking, okay, like if I'm going to do this for like 5 years, what am I going to do in like year 2 and year 3 about guests? Like I'm going to run out of guests. And this actually showed me that I don't necessarily need to keep chasing guests and get on a plane and go interview this person or whatever. I don't need to do that necessarily to get a lot of views in a podcast format. And so the other thing this showed too is when you're having a podcast guest on, if I have a lot of rapport with that person, the conversation might shift a little bit more towards 50-50. But generally, if I don't have as much rapport with them, like I do like Ravi, for instance, it's going to be like 20-80 or 10-90 to where like I'm not going to do a lot of talking and demonstrating of my expertise. And that kind of hurts my quality of audience and also hurts my conversion in terms of how well my mid-rolls do. But the nice thing about this format is because it's with my CMO and nobody knows who he is, and because of the way it was packaged beforehand, the conversation was completely pretty much 50-50, which allows me to demonstrate more of my expertise. Okay. And then regarding the packaging and titling. All right. So I know I shit on a lot of packaging and titling earlier, but this is kind of like where I'm shifting on it. All right. Is what I've learned since is that, again, where we start with is who we're targeting, what problem we're trying to solve for them, and what we're personally interested in. So that all preceded the packaging. And so we actually didn't like sit down and we were like, oh, like look at all these outliers. Let's make a tier list video. I literally thought like what would be really cool for my audience is if we did a tier list on the best marketing funnels in 2026. I just thought first like who and what problem we're solving for them and what they would actually like. Right. So it preceded the packaging. And it was only after the fact that we didn't even think we were going to title it this way, but we were like, dude, we ended up going an hour with the tier list. And we were like, oh, that's like the perfect packaging for this. Let's just do that. And so if you can think about like, this is kind of the shift I've had with podcasts is that I try not to make it very interview based because the packaging and the titling doesn't end up being that good. What I try to think about is like, how can I collab with this other person to create a training to where the idea, the packaging, and the titling is going to work really well on YouTube. And again, not to try to go as viral as possible, but to solve a problem for my audience. So hopefully this makes sense. It's a shift and it's a distinction. But what's crazy is if you do it this way, you can outperform a very, very good guest like Dean Graziosi just by having better titling and packaging. And it's a topic that your audience actually cares about. So hopefully this makes sense. And the nice thing about this too is, again, I can do a limitless amount of podcasts with my CMO. Like we could do one tomorrow. I don't have to keep chasing a new guest and a new guest and a new guest, and I can demonstrate more of my expertise. So now, and you'll see this as like some future videos come out because they're already recorded. They haven't come out yet. You'll see like some of the guests I'm having now in the future, I'm really trying to structure it to where it's almost like a training. Like I had Jason Flagin on 2 days ago. And obviously we're talking about one-to-many persuasion, webinars, and all of this stuff. And so I'm trying to think through like, how can I make our conversation so good about going one-to-many and webinars and all of that stuff to where it's fun to listen to, yes. But you could almost put it in a course because it's so valuable about that topic to where like if somebody's going to go do their webinar, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I got to go back to that video and take notes on how well that was. Okay. Or how good that was. So that was a big breakthrough. And again, it's valuable because I don't have to keep chasing guests. And also it just really went to show like the audience and the problem and starting with that first and then still caring about the packaging, but after the fact really mattered. So Hopefully it makes sense. Now, then shortly after I launched this video, and this video banged. Okay. This is probably going to do 20, 30K over the long term. And so this was my highest performing solo video of all time outside of the Hormozi, kind of like trendy ones I did where I basically publicly declared I gave him a bunch of money. And so this one, more than anything, I got crazy feedback from, again, super high freaking level people. And what I learned is, opposed to vague, highly edited, highly produced, talking head videos, this one was basically, it's like this video. It was in one take. It was insanely informationally dense. Like because these are kind of the type of videos I used to do. And every YouTube guru told me these will never work, right? Too informationally dense, not good enough for beginners. You got to do a bunch of takes. You got to do editing. You can't use a Google Doc. Well, this was in one take, informationally dense. I legit used a Google Doc and it outperformed basically anything I had ever done by myself ever. And so also I made this from the very beginning with zero idea of what the packaging would be. I just wanted to make this video because frankly, the offers training in my course, it needed redone based on a lot of stuff I've learned over the past several years. And I was kind of like super passionate about it. I was reading about economics. I kind of like incorporated some new economic principles into it. And so, again, like it just crazy outperformed, which reinforced the idea that what is really valuable what works really well and what people want is just valuable content. Like what matters is the value of the content. And does that mean you should just ditch packaging, titling, production value, all that stuff? No, but focus on who you're going after, what problem you're solving, and making the fucking shit valuable. And then let your strategist take it after that. Okay. So hopefully I'm like hammering this point home, but again, this was just like, I just was in my own way of just not doing this. So anyways, overall, what are the overall lessons? What's next? What am I struggling with right now? So a few lessons I think anybody can take away is, if I haven't hit this hard enough, here again, solve a problem for a specific audience first, package title second. Okay. Especially if you're in a business owner, and even if it leads to less views, which in my case, it led to more views, it's still worth it. Okay. So again, my personal flow is, what am I most interested in right now? Who is my specific audience? What problem do they have? And then I do think through like, will this topic work decently well on YouTube? Like I know certain stuff is just, it's too far of a stretch to really work on YouTube. But, like I'll give you an example. Like I read 4,000 pages on Lyndon B. Johnson. I kind of wanted to make a video about it, but I was like, I don't know how I'm going to relate this to my audience and a topic on YouTube that's going to work. So there's some stuff I do pass on, but a lot of times it's what I'm reading, what I'm interested in, what's going on in my life, what's passionate that I want to share. And then I kind of try to cross section that with like, will this topic work decently well on YouTube? And is my audience going to be interested in it? And then also, how can I make it as valuable as possible? So like, who cares if you use a Google Doc? Who cares if you use slides? Just like make it fucking valuable. And then I do the title and packaging last, or my strategist does that for that matter. Okay. So this is what works for me. Obviously, like, again, I'm not a content guru. I'm not trying to talk to people who are in entertainment or whatever. Or if you're in health or something extremely broad, I do think like ideation is far, far more important. But even then, still, you should think about the people who are at the top of the game in all of those industries. They're not copying other people's ideas, right? Like they kind of use it as almost like a swipe file, but they're coming up with original ideas based on knowing where their market is at and what topics really hit. And I think that's the key distinction that I see a lot of people not doing, because again, how many people have you seen how to get customers so fast it feels illegal? Like it just makes me sick. So number 2 is making content you like for people you like doesn't necessarily mean less views. So again, everybody told me if you go more tactical, you're going to get very low views, but you might get some better leads, whatever. I experienced the exact opposite. The more valuable I tried to make the content, the better it was. Sure, you got to think about topics to an extent, but again, it worked really well. Now, this is a big one, and it's not going broad first. And so if you've read the cold start problem, it's kind of like that level of thinking. So again, when I tried to go broad first and trying to make these really broad videos, it was because I figured content was only worth it if and only if I got a lot of views, because that would maybe equate to revenue. Because again, like for me, getting to 10 to 20K views a month, it's not going to put a dent in my actual revenue. So I'm not saying this can't work. Like I'm sure people can start from zero and go really broad from the very beginning. But especially if you're in the business space, like a lot of people probably watching this video, this is not how people grew, and people don't do this. So if you look at Hormozi, he started with gyms, then he went to like online service businesses and went pretty hardcore business information. Like that's when really a lot of people were like loving his stuff, especially my audience. They miss this type of content. Then he went to all businesses, but still pretty hardcore business information. Then he went to a broader mix of like some high level business, but a lot of like personal development, young guys in your 20s, yada, yada, yada. Dan Martell, he started with SaaS, went to broader business, then went to personal development / AI. Cardone, sales, then he went to marketing, business growth, then he went to real estate, then he's like money, personal development. So a lot of these guys, like they didn't start at the very top. They didn't start broad. You kind of like start with the cold start problem and work with broad. Cold start problem, by the way, is essentially like if you think about how Facebook grew, they started with like one college, then they went to another college, then they went to colleges across the country, then they went to high schools across the country, then they went to everybody, right? But like when you're creating a network effect, which is not necessarily what social media is, but when you're trying to like carve out a niche essentially and get a lot of like, you're trying to get that initial traction. Okay. It's easier to start small where you can be in a niche to absolutely dominate and then grow bigger over time. So I think the sequence for most people, and especially if you're in the business space, should go like this: small puddle where you can make hyper valuable content for a small specific audience. Nobody did this better than Ryan Clogg when he posted like 100 videos in 100 days or whatever it was. Like think about that. That's where most people should just start. Don't even give a shit about the packaging and titling. Just be like, I'm just going to rip like super valuable stuff. Okay. And it really worked out for him. He went from, obviously he was running a successful business before, but he went from nobody, I didn't even know who he was. Nobody knew who he was, to like now everybody in the industry knows who he is. And I mean, he's barely breaks like 1,000 views a video. Some videos he did, but barely. Okay. Then stage 2, just add some basic production value and try to get better at the packaging and titling post-production. And then also, become more aware of the YouTube meta and become in stage 3 more picky about the topic selection. Okay. So this is kind of like where I've like sort of gotten to, and this is probably where I was like way back in the day and so to speak. So again, I'm not saying that the YouTube meta and the strategies and all that stuff doesn't matter. But again, the problem is so many people just let that just drive everything that they do, and it just kills all their originality. And then stage 4 is you can slowly broaden your audience as you get bigger if you want. Like I might not even do this, but if I kind of like really keep this up for like a year, I might go slightly broader into business, okay? And then a little bit broader into business. But I'll probably still stay always into business owners who are like high-level business owners in a podcast that actually watch. Now, lesson number 4 is that the views don't equal money, okay? So another thing to think about is there's a lot of people, if you look at the people who are probably making the most money on YouTube, they don't necessarily have the most views, okay? And I think Jeremy Haynes is a great example of this. Like, I don't know his numbers personally, but I would imagine, I think he gets like 5,000 views a video. And I'm pretty sure he built an 8-figure business off the back of 5,000 views a video. So, I mean, if that's not proof to you, I don't know what it is. But if you think about it from my situation, if I sell 10 masterminds a month from organic, for me, based on our mastermind cost, I'm going to add 10 million a year and probably 8 million a year profit. Okay. If I do that, that's fine with me. Like every 10 million helps. Another example of this is again, TBPN, which if you don't know them, you're probably not into like tech news and stuff, but they were like a tech news live streaming channel. They barely had any views. They sold to OpenAI for 100 to 300 million. And that goes to show the way I like to think about it is the way you should really optimize your audience, especially if you're in business, is you want to look at total CPMs times views is greater than just views. So it's not just views, but it's views times how valuable and how high level those people are to essentially advertisers. But then if you have your own business, like you're the advertiser. And then also the other thing too is I think, and just from what I've kind of realized doing this, have I made a lot of money off of this content stuff yet? No. But I can just tell like my relevance in the industry has gone way up. I'm way more top of mind for people. And my kind of authority is like a lot more rebuilt than what it was. And I think that from a networking and recruiting standpoint, it is such a good long-term asset. And it's something that like I can keep doing this even after maybe, who knows, like maybe the world freaking crazy changes and I'm not doing sales recruiting anymore in 10 years or whatever. But if I keep this with me, this is an asset that can stay with me all the way through my career that can launch the next thing I do. And a great lesson for this for me is, and I'll talk about this in a second in terms of struggles. I don't get many leads for, let's say, our B2B recruiting services from our YouTube videos compared to how many views we get. But when I promote the softwares that I own, we get crazy amount of leads. And so it works for promoting stuff like that too. Then lesson number 5 is I think podcast and interactive style content is so much better than solo content for multi-platform. And so obviously if you really go hard on TikTok and Instagram and whatever, and you're making very specific content for it, that's great. It probably is going to convert better, sure, right? But if you're a business owner and you're busy and you don't have time to do that shit like me, having something that's interactive like podcast, live stream, in-person events, it just cuts to multi-platform so much easier. And then overall, like I mentioned earlier, it funnels all down to your main long-form content strategy anyways. And so, I also think in a lot of cases, unless you're really good at like TikTok and Instagram and you just know how to really rip that algorithm, I think that oftentimes the podcast style, interactive style content does better than the solo stuff anyways. And also, like, I know Hormozi's come out and said, I saw a video that the reels that he posts that are just Q&As on his Instagram generate way more views than the more specific stuff that gets 10 times the, generates way more revenue than the more specific stuff that gets 10 times the views. So that's a big thing as well. The last lesson number 6, is you should use the resources and advantages you already have. And so for me, going broad was stupid considering I have deep knowledge and expertise, right? So I should just double down on that. And I have an extensive network. Like the podcast thing made total sense because I could just leverage such a phenomenal network that I already had combined with my deep knowledge and expertise of talking to high level business concepts, right? So like just use what you already have, right? Like think about the resource you already have, create a strategy from that. So I'll tell you what's next for me and what I'm struggling with. So number 1 is figuring out the best offers for YouTube. So this was a surprise for me, but I'm in a unique place where for me, I'm somewhat known already. Like I've spent tens of millions on ads for 7 years straight with the same offer. I'm clearly the category king in sales recruiting and everything with this specific offer. And I've worked with really a large part of my industry, right? Like, so a lot of the people who are very in the know, they're like deep in the industry, they're watching YouTube videos. I've almost worked with all of them. Okay. Like I'll tell you how I know this. If I go to an event that's like an industry event and I start my talk by saying who's worked with us, I usually can get 50 to 60% of the room. Like it's pretty crazy. And so because of that, I believe that my CTAs for our direct B2B recruiting services, they're not going to get the same response as some of my peers who are maybe a little bit newer. And maybe some of that's due to my podcast format because it's not as authority building or what have you. But I've really found also the same with the solo videos. And so the things that I've realized that I'm working on is I also think the CTAs, I need to incorporate them more into the content naturally, opposed to being mid-rolls. And that's just me being not lazy because it's just easy to do a mid-roll. You just throw it in there every time. And then also I need to focus on offers that convert better on YouTube. So I figured the offers that would work best on ads because it's to a cold audience, like, hey, if it works on ads, it'll work on YouTube. And I found out that this is not necessarily true. So like I thought that, done for you offers, stuff like that, like that's what really works well on ads. So I figured, okay, it's going to work on YouTube. Not so much. So done for you offers, great with ads, not on YouTube. Courses, terrible with ads, great on YouTube. Coaching, it's kind of 50-50. Depending on what it is, you can sell it on ads. Again, that rocks on YouTube. Live in-person events, you can make it work with ads, but it's tough. They destroy on YouTube. Software, you can do both. In my experience, both work really well on YouTube. So the future CTAs I'm thinking about doing is like CTAing my live event in Scotland. So in July, we're having 200 people out again, 1 million to 10 million plus. Probably the top person there is probably going to be 50, 60, 70 million in revenue. And it's me speaking for 3 days. I bring in also speakers who are essentially top experts or doing 8 or multiple 8 figures, sharing what's working for them, or they're a domain expert, like an advertising expert or fulfillment expert or what have you, sharing what's working for their clients and so on and so forth. And we really mastermind and network and learn a lot of shit for 3 days. And it's in Scotland. It's in a chateau. It's super, super cool. Like it's going to be extremely experiential, extremely fun. And ultimately, like something where you can get a lot of value and learn from and network with amazing people. But at the same time, like we're going to have a blast. And so that's at the end of July. If you want to, there should be like a link in the description if you want to check it out. But I'll be doing more mid-rolls about that type of stuff. So you can actually see what's going on there. I might launch, even though I've been really busy, I may launch one-on-one coaching. Like I might take on like 5 clients or something, maybe train their sales teams or something like that, but it's going to be very, very expensive. Also, I'll promote Dialer and Saleskick more. So if you don't know what those are, Dialer.io is essentially our call software to where I partner with Matt Ryder on that. It gets way better pickup rates because of a lot of different reasons, a lot of compliance, and also how it's gone through the enterprise carriers and not through Twilio. But it gets way better pickup rates, sometimes double the pickup rates of traditional dialers. And then Saleskick basically automates all of our sales ops backend, as well as a replacement for Calendly and OneSub. So again, you can check that out if you want to. And then I may even do like one-time virtual events, like just on a Friday or a Saturday, getting people together. And then, kind of creating that into like an info product that I could sell, and I could do Q&A, and I could like help people live and all that stuff. But like maybe giving like a training and then doing a Q&A afterwards. So let me know what you want to see from me. I'm happy to CTA and sell you whatever you want to buy. You just let me know. And then the other challenge I'm having is time. So like in a perfect world, again, I'd hit the solo video once a week or maybe even twice a week, and maybe even do the podcast on a separate channel. But the solo videos, like I mentioned earlier, it was tough for me as they just take time. And kind of back to my plan to hit 10 million a month. What I'm really doing right now is I'm expanding the company. And, obviously Closers.io will always stay a sales training and recruiting company, but that's going to be one company under a holding company that's going to hold a bunch of different recruiting companies. And so essentially what we're doing is we're expanding into creating new divisions, leveraging our shared services for sales recruiting and the recruiting department, the marketing department, and so on and so forth, to do recruiting, let's say, for HVAC techs, to do recruiting, let's say, for roofing companies, to do recruiting for nurses, NPs, et cetera, on the fulfillment side of healthcare, right? And so those divisions are what I'm really spending most of my time building out. That's like, a plan that actually is, I believe, is a really clear shot at getting to 100 to 250 million, opposed to just trying to go vertical just with sales recruiting. And so for me, do I want to make one solo video a week, or do I want to build out the infrastructure to do 250 million? I want to do the 250 million. So that's why for me, consistency can be pretty tough with the solo videos, and why I love the podcast so much. So anyways, number 3 is, I already mentioned this, but keeping the guest quality high. I kind of hit that. Like I'm going to be doing a lot of formats that are more collabs and more trainings that I don't need as high quality of guest, but I'll still obviously over time, still maybe try to go maybe a little bit broader, get some really good guests that have been on other podcasts and so on and so forth. And then the other thing that we're working on is dialing in the other platforms. So like we really need to get better at X. We need to do our YouTube mids clip channel a lot better, which I think that's on its way. And then also even maybe doing some specific content for Instagram and Facebook Reels and all that stuff. But with that being said, that's where we're at. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. See you in the next video.